The rancher's horse had been missing for 3 days. It returned with an injured Apache woman. The sun had barely risen over the horizon when the rancher stepped out of his small wooden cabin. The air was crisp, and a faint mist hovered over the fields, catching the early light and giving the landscape a soft golden glow. His eyes scanned the pasture, but there was something missing. His chest tightened as he realized what it was. His horse was gone, not just missing for a few hours, but for 3 full days now. He had grown attached to that horse. It wasn't just any horse. Its coat was a deep, rich brown, almost like polished wood, and it carried a strength and pride that reminded him of himself when he was younger. He had raised it from a colt, trained it through harsh winters and hot summers, and it had been his loyal companion for years. The horse was more than an animal to him. It was a partner, a friend, and sometimes the only company in the vast loneliness of the ranch. The rancher walked slowly toward the fence, looking for tracks or signs. The ground was soft from the morning dew, and he squinted at the earth, hoping to see the deep prints of hooves. There were some faint marks, but they were scattered, like the horse had wandered in circles or struggled to find its way. His brow furrowed. He had ridden the land countless times and knew every hill, every stream, every grove of trees. Yet somehow the tracks seemed to go nowhere. He sighed and ran a hand through his short graying hair. Life on the ranch was never easy. Days were long and nights were often colder than he liked. He had faced storms, fires, and the occasional wild animal attack, but losing his horse in such a mysterious way made him feel uneasy. The ranch was surrounded by wide, open plains that could hide all sorts of dangers. Coyotes, wolves, or even thieves could be lurking somewhere, and the thought gnawed at him. He decided to saddle another horse and go searching. The second horse was smaller, not as fast, and lacked the pride of the missing one, but it was reliable. As he prepared the saddle, he thought of all the times he had trusted the brown horse to carry him safely through rough terrain, to sense danger before he could. The bond they shared was rare, almost unspoken, yet undeniable. And now, for reasons he couldn't understand, it was gone. He rode slowly at first, scanning the rolling hills. The landscape was both beautiful and harsh. Wild grasses swayed in the wind, and distant cliffs cast long shadows across the plains. Birds flew overhead, their cries echoing in the quiet morning. Everything seemed normal, but the absence of his horse made the ranch feel emptier, colder. He called out its name, his voice carrying over the hills. But there was no response. Only the wind replied. Hours passed as he followed the faint tracks. He moved carefully, aware that the plains could hide dangers beneath their beauty. Sometimes he would pause, listening to the sounds of the land. A rustle in the grass, a distant crack of a branch, a shadow moving too quickly. He examined everything. He had spent decades living close to nature, learning to read its signs. But even with all his experience, the missing horse left him with a sense of helplessness. By midday, he reached a small grove of trees that he knew well. This was a place where deer often grazed, and where the wind whispered differently through the branches. He dismounted and walked among the trees, brushing his hands along the rough bark, listening carefully. It was unusual for a horse to wander this far. Horses preferred open spaces, yet the tracks led here, twisting around the grove and vanishing again into the tall grass. The rancher felt a chill. Something about this felt wrong. He decided to rest for a moment and take a drink from his canteen. Sitting on a large rock, he allowed his mind to wander. The horse had always been dependable, never straying from the ranch without reason. The fact that it had been gone for 3 days was deeply troubling. He remembered the last morning he had seen it. It had been grazing calmly, ears flicking at the sound of the wind. There had been no sign of fear, no hint that something dangerous was near, and yet, here it was, missing. As he sat there, he began to consider the possibilities. Perhaps it had been frightened by something, another animal, a storm, even humans. Perhaps it had wandered in search of food or water, though he knew the pastures were well stocked. Or maybe, he thought grimly, it had been taken. The idea made his stomach tighten. Theft was rare in this area, but not impossible. Some travelers and wanderers passed through the plains, and not all of them were honest. He shook his head, trying to push the dark thought aside. He rose and continued walking, moving carefully through the tall grass. The land stretched endlessly around him, rolling hills dotted with patches of trees, streams, and rocks. The sun climbed higher, and the warmth began to dry the morning dew. He noticed small signs along the way. A broken branch here, disturbed soil there. These were subtle clues that something had happened, though they didn't tell him what. He felt like he was searching not just for a horse, but for a story he didn't yet understand. By late afternoon, he reached the edge of a shallow canyon. The wind had picked up, carrying dust and the faint smell of wildflowers. He dismounted again and peered into the canyon, looking for any sign of the horse. The shadows were long now, and the sun painted the rocks in shades of red and gold. His heart sank slightly as he realized the horse was nowhere in sight. The canyon was wide and deep, a place where an animal could easily lose its way or get trapped. He called out again, louder this time, his voice echoing off the rocks. Silence answered him. He spent a few more hours searching, moving slowly and methodically. Each step seemed heavier than the last. His thoughts wandered to the long nights he had spent alone on the ranch, tending to the animals, fixing fences, and watching the stars. He had faced loneliness before, but now it felt sharper. Losing the horse wasn't just losing an animal. It was losing a companion, a piece of his daily life that had brought comfort and purpose. As evening approached, he returned to the top of a hill to survey the land. The sky was painted with colors he had seen 1,000 times, orange, pink, and purple blending together. But tonight, it seemed different. The beauty of the land contrasted sharply with his worry. He wondered if he would ever see his horse again. The thought of it being lost forever made his chest tighten, but he refused to give up hope. Horses were strong, intelligent creatures, and his had always been clever. If anyone could find its way back, it was this one. As night fell, he made the difficult decision to return to the ranch. The search today had given him no answers, only more questions. He hoped that the horse had found shelter somewhere, that it was safe. He lit a small lantern in his cabin, the warm light flickering across the wooden walls. Sitting by the fire, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. He thought about the bond he shared with the horse, the countless mornings like this one, and the sense of loss that came from uncertainty. He resolved that tomorrow he would continue searching. He would ride further, call louder, and not rest until he had some answers. For now, though, he needed sleep, if only to regain strength for the long day ahead. As he lay down, the wind whispered outside, carrying the scent of grass and earth. Somewhere out there, he knew, his horse was still alive. Somehow, he could feel it. The thought gave him a fragile hope that he would cling to through the long night. And so, the first part of the story closes with the rancher, alone in his cabin, filled with worry but determined. The vast plain stretched endlessly beyond him, beautiful but unforgiving. 3 days had passed and the horse was missing, yet he refused to give up hope. The quiet tension hung in the air, setting the stage for the next part of the story, when the unexpected return would change everything. The next morning, the rancher woke before the sun, as was his habit. The events of the previous days weighed heavily on him. He moved through the cabin quietly, lighting the stove and pouring himself a small cup of coffee. His mind, however, was not on breakfast. It was on the missing horse. He thought of the long hours he had spent searching, the empty tracks, and the strange feeling that something unusual had happened. Today, he resolved, he would not leave the ranch without some sign. The first rays of light touched the pasture when a familiar whinny split the quiet morning air. The rancher froze, coffee halfway to his mouth. His heart leapt. He ran toward the fence, eyes scanning the field, and there it was, his brown horse, moving slowly toward him, its coat dusty and mane tangled. Relief and disbelief collided in him. He called the horse's name, voice trembling, and the animal picked up its pace, ears flicking back and forth nervously. But something was wrong. The horse's steps were uneven, and it carried a burden that made the rancher's stomach tighten. At first he could not tell what it was, but as he drew closer, the figure of a person became visible, slumped across the horse's back. His pulse quickened, a mix of fear and curiosity surging through him. He had expected to see the horse alone, safe, or perhaps frightened. He had not expected this. The rancher ran to meet the horse, speaking softly, trying not to startle it. The closer he got, the clearer it became. It was a woman, her clothing torn and dirty, her face streaked with dust and dried blood. She lay unconscious, completely still. The rancher's mind raced. Who was she? How had she ended up here? And most importantly, what had happened to her? The horse's return had brought more than relief. It had brought a mystery that demanded immediate attention. Carefully, he dismounted and approached the horse. The animal snorted, tense but not aggressive. The rancher reached out to steady the woman, gently lifting her from the horse's back. She was light, but her limbs were weak and limp. He laid her down on a blanket he had kept in the barn for emergencies and stepped back for a moment to assess her injuries. Cuts and bruises marred her arms and legs, and a deep gash on her forehead was already beginning to swell. She was alive, but she needed help, and fast. The rancher's first instinct was practical. He fetched clean water from the well and a small cloth to begin tending to her wounds. He washed the cuts gently, careful not to cause more pain, and applied a makeshift bandage to the gash on her forehead. All the while he spoke softly, though he knew she could not hear him. "You're safe now," he murmured. "You're safe here." The words were almost a prayer, a hope that his calm might reach her. As he worked, he took in the details of her appearance. Her skin was sun-browned, her hair dark and tangled. Her clothing suggested she had been traveling for days, perhaps weeks. There was a quiet strength about her, even in her weakened state, something in the way she held herself that told him she had survived hardship before. Yet at this moment, she was completely vulnerable, and the rancher felt a deep responsibility settle over him. Once her immediate wounds were treated, he went to fetch some food and a warm blanket. He prepared a simple meal of bread, salted meat, and water, and placed it near her side. She did not move to eat, but the smell seemed to stir some faint awareness. Her fingers twitched, and her eyelids fluttered. He knelt beside her, speaking softly again, trying to ease her fear. She stirred, her eyes half opening, revealing dark, wary eyes that seemed to measure him, searching for any sign of threat. The rancher understood her hesitation. He had spent years reading the body language of animals and humans alike, learning to sense fear and trust. He remained still, letting her adjust to his presence. Slowly, she moved her hand toward the food, then pulled back, unsure. He nodded gently, giving her time. Patience, he thought, was as important now as any bandage or water. When she finally sat up, leaning slightly on her arms, she looked around the barn with cautious curiosity. Her gaze fell on the horse, which had calmed and stood quietly in the corner, ears swiveling at every small sound. The rancher's mind raced with questions, but he knew that pressing her for answers too soon would be a mistake. He had to build trust first. "Take your time," he said. "You're safe here. You don't have to move if you're not ready." The woman's lips moved, forming words in a language the rancher did not understand. He recognized the cadence and tone as different from his own speech, foreign yet clear. He shook his head, indicating he could not understand. She sighed, a small, almost frustrated sound, but then relaxed slightly, realizing he would not force her to speak. Instead, she pointed to her wounds and then to him, gesturing for water. He poured a small amount into a cup and held it to her lips. She drank carefully, then nodded, showing the first sign of gratitude. Hours passed slowly. The rancher continued to tend to her, cleaning her minor wounds, offering small pieces of food, and speaking softly to reassure her. He began to notice subtle signs of recognition in her eyes, the realization that he posed no threat, that he was there to help. He also watched the horse, which seemed to share in the relief, nudging her gently once she had taken a sip of water. The bond between them, the woman and the animal, was clear. The horse had not just returned, it had saved her. Evening came, painting the barn in shades of orange and pink. The woman leaned against the haystack, exhausted but calmer, her breathing steady. The rancher brought her a blanket and helped her lie down comfortably. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since he had found her, she rested. The rancher sat nearby, thinking about what had happened, piecing together the events that might have led to this moment. He had no answers yet, but he knew the horse's return had changed everything. By nightfall, the rancher lit a small lantern, the warm glow illuminating the woman's face. Her features were striking, even in repose. He felt a strange mixture of curiosity, concern, and respect. Whoever she was, she had survived something dangerous, something that had left her wounded and alone in the wilderness. And yet, she had made it this far, carried by the horse that had been missing for days. It was a miracle, and he could not help but feel awe at the animal's intelligence and loyalty. Sleep eventually claimed the rancher, though he kept one eye open, listening to the quiet breathing of the woman and the horse. The wind whispered through the open barn doors, carrying the sense of grass and earth. Somewhere far away, the plains stretched endlessly. But here, in this small space, a fragile sense of safety had been created. The woman had survived, the horse had returned, and the rancher had become a witness to something extraordinary. As the night deepened, the rancher reflected on the events of the day. Life on the ranch was often harsh, unpredictable, and lonely, but today had reminded him of something vital. Courage, trust, and loyalty could appear in the most unexpected ways. He had seen the power of an animal's bond with a human, the resilience of someone pushed to their limits, and the importance of patience in moments of crisis. These lessons were not learned from books or experience alone. They were learned in the quiet, intense reality of life. The night passed slowly, with the rancher waking occasionally to check on the woman and the horse. Each time he looked, he felt a growing respect for both. Their strength, their trust in each other, and their quiet endurance. He realized that this day, which had begun with fear and uncertainty, had become a turning point. He did not yet know her story, but he knew that he would be part of it now, however briefly, and that thought brought a sense of purpose he had not felt in a long time. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the woman stirred again. Her eyes opened fully, meeting the rancher's gaze. This time, there was recognition, a flicker of trust, and perhaps even relief. She tried to speak, and though he could not understand her words, he nodded encouragingly. Together they faced the new day, two lives connected by circumstance, courage, and a horse that had returned against all odds. The second day of her recovery had begun, and with it came the promise of questions answered, stories told, and a bond slowly forming. For the rancher, the past 3 days of uncertainty and fear had led to this moment of connection. And though challenges remained, the sense of hope was stronger now than it had been in a long time. The horse had returned, carrying not just an injured traveler, but a story that was waiting to unfold, and the rancher was ready to witness it. The morning sun filtered through the barn's wooden slats, casting long lines of light across the floor. The injured woman stirred slowly, her eyes blinking against the brightness. She was still weak, but the rest she had taken seemed to have helped. The rancher had left her a small bowl of water and some bread beside her, and now she picked up the food with trembling hands. Her movements were careful, almost cautious, as if every small action required careful thought. The rancher watched quietly from a distance. He did not want to startle her or rush her recovery. For hours he moved around the barn, tending to chores, feeding the other animals, cleaning the barn, and making sure everything was in order. But his eyes kept returning to her. He could see the subtle signs of pain in her posture, the way she flinched when she shifted. Each small improvement gave him hope, but he also understood that patience was the key. She had been through something terrifying, and it would take time for her body and mind to recover. Gradually, she became more aware of her surroundings. The barn was simple, filled with hay, tools, and the quiet presence of animals. The horse, her rescuer, stood quietly nearby, occasionally nudging her gently as if checking that she was awake and alert. She looked at the animal, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and amazement. The rancher noticed the way she studied the horse, how her fingers lightly touched its mane. It was clear that she understood, in her own way, that this horse had saved her life. The woman attempted to speak, but the rancher could not understand her words. The language she spoke was unfamiliar to him, a soft, melodic sound that carried emotion even if he could not grasp the meaning. He shook his head gently, smiling reassuringly, and she seemed to understand. Instead of frustration, she offered a small, tentative smile. It was a fragile sign, but it told him she trusted him enough to feel safe. Over the next few hours, he helped her sit up properly, supporting her back and shoulders. She winced at some of the movements, a reminder of how severely she had been hurt. He brought water to her lips, helping her drink slowly, and offered small bites of bread. Each careful sip and bite was a victory, a small step toward recovery. The rancher noticed her strength returning little by little, though he knew she would need more rest before she could move freely or speak fully. As the day went on, he decided to try to communicate more clearly. He used gestures, pointing to himself and saying his name, then pointing to her and waiting for her to respond. She nodded when he did this, and then pointed to herself, speaking her name in the soft language that rolled off her tongue like music. Though he could not pronounce it correctly, he repeated it slowly, hoping to show respect. She smiled faintly, as if acknowledging the effort, and the rancher felt a small spark of connection growing between them. The rancher realized he needed to provide more than food and water. She needed comfort, a sense of security, and a safe place to rest. He found a clean blanket and placed it beneath her, making her as comfortable as possible. The horse remained close, its presence a quiet reassurance. She reached out to stroke it gently, her fingers tracing the strong muscles and soft coat. The animal lowered its head, almost as if bowing to her touch. The bond between them was clear, silent, powerful, and enduring. By late afternoon, she seemed more alert and aware. She gestured to her injuries, indicating the gash on her forehead and the bruises on her arms and legs. The rancher understood immediately and fetched a fresh cloth and clean water. He carefully cleaned the wounds again, applying new bandages, all while speaking softly, even if she could not understand his words fully. She watched him intently, sometimes flinching, sometimes relaxing, and he adjusted his movements accordingly. He learned quickly what caused her pain and what comforted her. As evening approached, the rancher brought a small lantern into the barn. The warm glow illuminated her face, showing her features more clearly. She was young, though her eyes carried a depth of experience that suggested she had faced many hardships. Her dark hair framed her face, tangled but beautiful in a wild, natural way. The rancher felt a mix of admiration and protectiveness. She had survived against difficult odds, and he was beginning to understand the strength that lay beneath her fragile appearance. Eventually, she tried to speak again, forming words that the rancher could not understand. He shook his head gently and smiled, pointing to her mouth and then to his own. He made simple sounds, hoping to bridge the gap between their languages. She watched carefully, then repeated some of the sounds, her voice hesitant but curious. It was slow, imperfect communication, but it was a start. Each attempt built trust. Each moment strengthened the fragile bond between them. Night fell, and the barn was quiet except for the soft breathing of the woman and the occasional snort of the horse. The rancher prepared a small area for her to sleep, carefully arranging the blanket so that she could rest safely and comfortably. He gave her a small nod, a silent signal that she was safe. She closed her eyes, her breathing steady, and he felt a sense of relief. She was no longer unconscious, no longer entirely vulnerable. She was beginning to recover, and the day's small successes gave him hope. During the night, he stayed nearby, watching over both her and the horse. Each time she stirred, he was there to offer comfort or support. He realized that her survival had depended not only on his help, but on the horse's loyalty and intelligence. The animal had carried her to safety, guided by instinct and, perhaps, a sense of purpose. The rancher marveled at the quiet heroism of the horse, understanding that without it, the woman might not have survived at all. The next morning the woman awoke more alert than the day before. She moved carefully, testing her strength, and the rancher helped her stand. She wobbled slightly but managed to remain upright. Her eyes met his, and there was a moment of silent communication, a recognition of the shared effort, the mutual reliance, and the unspoken bond that had begun to form. He offered her water and food again, and she accepted with more confidence, showing signs of strength returning. Over the next few hours, the rancher and the woman began to establish a routine. He would bring her small tasks, holding the horse's reins, passing him tools, or simply observing him work. She engaged with these tasks slowly, carefully, but with growing confidence. The rancher noticed how she observed everything, learning quickly, adapting to her surroundings. He realized that her resilience was remarkable. Despite the trauma she had endured, she was strong, intelligent, and determined. Throughout the day, she began to communicate more clearly through gestures and broken words. She pointed to the horse, then to the rancher, trying to indicate her story, though he could not yet understand. He nodded patiently, encouraging her, showing that he was listening even if the words were not clear. They were learning each other's ways, slowly bridging the gap between two worlds. By evening, the rancher felt a sense of cautious optimism. The woman was recovering well, the horse remained loyal and calm, and a quiet sense of safety had settled over the barn. The events of the past few days had been extraordinary. An unexpected visitor, a loyal animal, and the slow, steady building of trust between two very different people. He understood that their time together had already changed him, teaching him patience, compassion, and the quiet power of empathy. As night fell again, the woman rested comfortably under the warm blanket. The rancher sat nearby, watching over her and the horse. The wind whispered through the barn, carrying the scents of the plains, the grass, and the earth. The quiet of the night was a reminder of both the beauty and harshness of life on the ranch. He thought about the challenges that lay ahead, learning her story, understanding her past, and helping her recover fully. But he also felt hope, a fragile but growing belief that they could face what came next together. The day closed with a sense of accomplishment and connection. The woman had survived, her strength was returning, and the bond between her, the horse, and the rancher was beginning to solidify. It was a quiet, steady victory, built not on words or grand gestures, but on care, patience, and mutual trust. The rancher knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but he also knew that together they could face whatever the plains might throw at them. And so, the third part of the story ends with the woman on the path to recovery, the rancher learning the importance of patience and empathy, and the horse remaining the silent guardian that had made it all possible. The stage was set for their journey to continue, filled with trust, courage, and the slow unveiling of the story that had brought them together. The days that followed were filled with quiet routines and cautious learning. The injured woman grew stronger each morning. She could walk a little farther each day and speak a few more words that the rancher could not yet understand. Yet, even as she recovered physically, there were moments when the rancher sensed unease in her eyes. He realized that surviving her injuries had not healed the fear and wariness that came from the dangers she had faced before arriving at the ranch. He knew it would take patience and understanding to help her feel truly safe. The rancher tried to give her space while still offering support. He worked nearby, tending to the animals and repairing fences, occasionally glancing at her to make sure she was steady on her feet. She would often sit quietly near the barn's edge, watching him work or stroking the horse's mane. The horse had become a source of comfort for her, a steady presence that did not demand conversation or explanation. He noticed how she smiled softly whenever the horse nuzzled her, and he realized that their bond had grown even stronger than he had imagined. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the woman attempted to speak again. Her words were broken and slow, but this time the rancher noticed patterns, repeated sounds and gestures that suggested she wanted to share her story. He listened patiently, nodding, smiling, and responding with simple words. They were far from understanding each other completely, but each attempt brought them closer. It was a delicate dance, one that required sensitivity and patience. Yet not all moments were easy. She would sometimes flinch at sudden noises, pulling back or shrinking into herself. The rancher quickly realized that her time alone in the wilderness had left deep impressions. She had been through frightening experiences, and even now, she reacted to perceived threats with caution. He respected her reactions, never forcing her to confront anything she was not ready for. Slowly, he began to sense the strength beneath her fear, the quiet resilience that had carried her this far. As the days passed, the rancher also began to notice the small ways she tried to understand him. She watched him closely while he worked, mimicking simple actions or pointing to objects to confirm their names. He would smile and nod, encouraging her efforts, amazed at her intelligence and determination. It became clear that her journey had not been easy, yet she had survived. Her spirit was quiet but unyielding, and the rancher could not help but admire it. The relationship between the two grew in subtle ways. They shared tasks on the ranch, simple routines that did not require full conversation. She would help feed the animals, carry buckets of water, and hold the horse's reins while he worked. Each small gesture was meaningful, a way for her to participate in life again, to regain control and confidence. The rancher, in turn, provided guidance and support without being overbearing. Together they formed a rhythm, a shared understanding that needed no words to exist. At times, the rancher thought about the world outside the ranch. He wondered about the people she had traveled with, the dangers she had faced, and the reason she had been alone in the wilderness. He wanted to ask, to understand her story fully, but he knew it was not the right moment. Trust had to come first. For now, it was enough that she was safe, healing, and slowly opening up to him. One evening, as the sky turned to deep purple and the first stars appeared, a faint noise reached them from the distant hills. The rancher tensed, moving closer to the barn doors to see. It was only a small group of travelers passing by, their voices carrying on the wind. But the woman flinched instinctively, eyes wide, and took a small step back. The rancher reached out gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. She looked at him, hesitation still in her gaze, and slowly relaxed. The incident reminded the rancher that her experiences had shaped her reactions. She had learned to survive by being cautious, by reading every sound and movement for danger. It was not fear that defined her, but vigilance. And though it caused small tensions in their days, it also taught him patience. He began to anticipate her reactions, moving more slowly, speaking more gently, and allowing her the time to adjust to every situation. As the week passed, they began to communicate more clearly. She would point to the horse and then to herself, indicating that it had carried her to safety. He would nod, impressed by her ability to convey complex ideas without words. She would gesture toward the horizon, suggesting the journey she had been on, though the details remained unclear. Slowly, he began to piece together fragments of her story, understanding that she had faced dangers in the wild that no one should have endured alone. The rancher also learned about her culture in small ways. She would pick plants from the nearby fields, preparing simple remedies and foods, showing him techniques he had never known. He observed, fascinated by her knowledge and resourcefulness. Though their communication was limited, they shared understanding through action, observation, and quiet cooperation. Each day brought a new lesson, a new connection, and a growing respect for one another. Despite the progress, tension sometimes emerged. Her cautious nature sometimes clashed with his practical approach to ranch life. She would hesitate to help in certain ways, fearing danger, while he tried to encourage her gently. These moments were brief but challenging, requiring patience and empathy from both sides. Over time, they learned to navigate these small conflicts, finding a balance that allowed trust to grow without forcing either of them too far too soon. One particularly quiet afternoon, the woman gestured toward the mountains in the distance, her eyes dark and reflective. The rancher sensed she was recalling a memory, a place she had traveled, or perhaps someone she had lost. He did not press for words, knowing that the story would come in its own time. Instead, he sat quietly beside her, offering silent support, showing that he was willing to wait. She rested her hand lightly on the horse's mane, and together the three of them sat in the fading sunlight, bound by shared survival and mutual respect. The rancher realized that trust was not something that could be rushed. Each day he saw evidence of her growing comfort, the way she ate without hesitation, the way she moved more confidently, the moments when she met his gaze without fear. And each day he felt the bond between them deepen. It was a quiet, steady connection, built not on grand gestures but on shared moments, patience, and understanding. As night fell, the rancher prepared a small fire outside the barn. The warmth spread across the yard, and the woman sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket. The horse stood close, occasionally nuzzling her gently, The rancher watched the flames dance, thinking about the journey that had brought them together, the lost horse, the injured traveler, and the days of careful tending and quiet patience. He understood that this was more than just survival. It was a lesson in empathy, courage, and the power of trust. By the time the stars filled the sky, the woman leaned back, eyes reflecting the light of the fire. She looked at the rancher, then at the horse, and offered a small, genuine smile. It was the first time he had seen her fully at ease, fully present in the moment. He returned the smile, realizing that the walls of fear and caution she had carried were slowly falling away. Trust had been earned, and a bond had formed, quiet, strong, and unspoken, yet unmistakable. That night, as they settled in for sleep, the rancher felt a sense of satisfaction and hope. The woman was recovering, the horse remained loyal and attentive, and a fragile but growing connection had been established. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new challenges, and perhaps new revelations about her story. But for now, they had created a small world of safety, trust, and understanding in the middle of the vast plains. And so Part 4 closes with the rancher and the woman navigating the delicate path of trust and understanding. Cultural differences, fear, and past traumas remained, but through patience, care, and shared experiences, they were learning to rely on each other. The horse remained the silent guardian, the bridge between two worlds, and the symbol of loyalty that had brought them together. The stage was set for the final part of their journey, where choices would be made, stories would unfold, and the true depth of their bond would become clear. The next morning, the rancher woke to the soft light of dawn spilling across the barn. The air was cool and still, carrying the scents of grass, earth, and the faint smoke from last night's fire. He moved quietly, careful not to disturb the woman, who was already awake and sitting near the horse. She looked stronger now, her posture steadier, and her movements more confident. It was clear she was ready for the next step of her journey, whatever it might be. The rancher approached slowly, carrying a small bundle of supplies, a blanket, some bread, and a water bottle. He set them down near her and gestured toward the items, hoping she would understand they were for her journey. She nodded, a faint smile appearing on her lips, and accepted the bundle carefully, handling each item with care. The sight of her strength returning filled him with both pride and sadness. Pride because she had recovered, and sadness because he knew that soon she would leave, and the quiet companionship they had formed would end. For several minutes they sat in silence. Words were unnecessary. The horse, sensing the change in mood, moved closer to her, nuzzling her shoulder gently. She leaned into the horse's warmth, stroking its mane slowly, her fingers tracing familiar patterns. The rancher watched the scene with quiet reflection. He realized how much he had grown attached to her presence, even in such a short time. The bond between them had been formed through patience, care, and shared survival, and it was stronger than he could have imagined. Finally, she looked at him, her dark eyes steady and full of meaning. She spoke, softly, slowly, in her own language. The rancher did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. There was gratitude, acknowledgement, and something deeper, a recognition of the time they had shared. He nodded, smiling, and gestured for her to stand. She rose with some effort, steadying herself on the horse. He helped her adjust the blanket and bundle on her back, making sure everything was secure for travel. Before leaving, she reached into a small pouch and brought out a simple token, a piece of cloth embroidered with a pattern he did not recognize. She handed it to him with a gentle smile. He took it carefully, understanding that it was a gesture of thanks, respect, and remembrance. Though the meaning of the token was unknown, he treasured it, realizing that it represented the bond they had formed, a connection that would endure even after their paths diverged. The horse, calm and patient, waited as she mounted. She sat confidently now, the strength and resilience she had regained evident in every movement. The rancher led the horse forward, giving them space while staying close enough to ensure their safety. She looked back once, her eyes meeting his, and he raised a hand in a quiet gesture of farewell. She nodded, a small smile crossing her face, and then turned her gaze forward, ready to continue her journey. As they moved across the plains, the rancher watched the figure of the woman and the horse grow smaller against the wide, open landscape. The sun rose higher, casting light on the rolling hills and distant mountains. The journey ahead for her was uncertain, filled with challenges and unknowns, but he felt confident that she would face them with the same courage and intelligence that had carried her this far. The horse, loyal and steadfast, remained her guide and companion, just as it had always been. Returning to the barn, the rancher felt a mix of emotions: relief, pride, and a quiet sorrow. He had come to care deeply for the woman, and now she was leaving. Yet he also knew that part of caring meant allowing her to continue her journey, to reclaim her freedom and her life beyond the ranch. He tended to the remaining chores with a lighter heart, knowing that he had played a role in her survival and recovery. The barn, once a place of quiet solitude, now held the memories of their shared days, moments of trust, care, and connection that would remain with him forever. The horse lingered for a moment, looking back toward the rancher as if to say goodbye. The rancher approached slowly, placing a hand on its neck, feeling the warmth of its coat and the steady rhythm of its breathing. He whispered softly, expressing gratitude to the animal that had saved a life and created a bond between two people. The horse whinnied softly in response, and then, sensing it was time, it followed the woman across the plains. Over the following days, the rancher reflected on the experience. He thought about the fragility of life, the importance of trust, and the quiet strength that could be found in resilience. He realized that the journey had taught him lessons beyond mere survival. Patience, empathy, and understanding had shaped every interaction, every decision, and every moment of care. The bond he had shared with the woman, though brief, had left a lasting impression, a memory of human connection forged under extraordinary circumstances. He often found himself looking toward the horizon, imagining her traveling across the plains, the horse carrying her safely, her spirit strong and unyielding. Though he did not know the details of her story, he understood that she was resilient, resourceful, and capable of facing whatever lay ahead. And in that knowledge, he found peace. He had provided shelter, care, and companionship when it had been most needed, and in return, he had been gifted the rare experience of shared trust and survival. Life on the ranch slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The days were filled with familiar tasks: feeding the animals, repairing fences, tending to the fields, but the memory of the woman and the horse remained vivid. The rancher often paused during his work, recalling the small gestures of trust, the moments of shared understanding, and the way the horse had guided her safely home. Each memory reinforced the lessons he had learned about resilience, courage, and the quiet bonds that could form between individuals. Weeks later, the rancher received word from travelers passing through the nearby plains. They spoke of a woman riding with a horse, strong and determined, moving steadily toward her destination. The description matched her perfectly. Relief and pride washed over him. She was continuing her journey, alive and well, carrying the strength she had regained at the ranch. He smiled, knowing that though their paths had diverged, she had not forgotten the care she had received and the bond that had been formed. In the evenings, the rancher would sit by the fire thinking about the events that had unfolded. The horse, ever loyal, remained by his side, a living reminder of the extraordinary events that had taken place. He stroked its mane, feeling gratitude for the animal that had bridged the gap between two lives, guided the injured woman to safety, and created a story of trust and resilience. The rancher understood that their journey together, though brief, had been transformative for all three of them: the woman, the horse, and himself. The plains continued to stretch endlessly beyond the ranch, a vast and unforgiving landscape, but the rancher now felt a deeper appreciation for its beauty and its challenges. Life was fragile, connections were precious, and moments of trust and care could change the course of events in ways no one could predict. He had witnessed this truth firsthand and carried it with him in every action, every choice, and every moment of reflection. One quiet evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the rancher looked toward the horizon one last time. He imagined her riding with the horse, safe and strong, facing the future with courage. Though their paths had separated, the memory of their shared days remained alive in his heart. The bond they had formed, silent, steadfast, and profound, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the loyalty of animals, and the quiet miracles that could arise from compassion and care. And so, the story closes with the rancher standing in the fading light, the horse by his side, and the plains stretching endlessly before him. He feels a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had helped save a life and had been part of something extraordinary. Though the woman was no longer physically present, the lessons, memories, and bonds they shared would remain with him forever. The ranch, once quiet and solitary, now held the echoes of courage, trust, and human connection, a story that would never be forgotten.